Hi. So, I was a doctor in Perth in Western Australia for 53 years. At first in hospital, then for many years as a family doctor in the suburbs, where I did everything that family doctors used to do in those days, which included consultations, home and hospital visits. I helped to bring 800 babies into the world and did a lot of tonsillectomies and appendicectomies and vasectomies and broken bones and things like that. And then specialist gradually took over much of that work, and as a family doctor I did nearly all consultations, home and hospital visits. Altogether, I had 500,000 consultations, home and hospital visits over the 53-year period. And I was particularly interested in the people who suffered most and got the worst treatment. I don't know why, but anyway, that was definitely people with serious mental health disorders and addicts. They were looked down on, they were treated as if it was their fault, and they were exploited. They were exploited by the pharmaceutical companies who made the medicines, a lot of the medicines for mental health and all the medicines for addiction, addictive. So people got on them and stayed on them for long periods of time, and the pharmaceutical companies managed to sell a lot of medicine. For instance, the commonest mental health disorders were anxiety, worry disorders, and all the medicines for anxiety, worry were addictive. Originally it was barbiturates. There were many different barbiturates and they were all addictive. And then in the 1960s we started to get these new medicines, Valium, Sarapax, Mogadon, Xanax, Ambien, Stilnox, all addictive. The sleeping medicines were all addictive, and the three main medicines for ADD, ADHD were addictive: dexamphetamine, Ritalin and dopamine. And that caused terrible problems because most people with ADD had one parent with ADD, and that meant that often that the work that the parents did was low paid if they had ADD, or they were unemployed because of their ADD. And to safeguard against the dangers of addictive ADD medicine, the authorities decided that family doctors couldn't prescribe those addictive medicines, that children had to get their ADD medicines from a pediatrician, and adults had to get it from a psychiatrist. And those specialists were costly. Very few people could afford them if they had no insurance. If they had health insurance, only a certain number of sessions per year was covered by the insurance, so they didn't get enough sessions with those specialists. And the wealthier people who had less ADD also had more advantages, because the consulting rooms of the ADD specialists, the pediatricians and psychiatrists, was often in the better end of town, and the people who lived in the better end of town, because they had higher incomes, could more easily access these specialists and could more easily afford them. Even the Children's Hospital in Perth did not have an ADD clinic. So those people who had to rely on government clinics had to wait, had very long waiting lists. Free government clinics had very long waiting lists. And the authorities also made it illegal for even the specialists to prescribe addictive medicines for people who were addicts. And in 1 year I treated 700 heroin addicts, and a third of them had ADD, and mostly it was undiagnosed, and none of them were being treated because it was illegal for addicts to have prescribed the ADD medicines. So in the late 1990s, we had a big epidemic of heroin addiction in Perth, and I decided I needed to learn about heroin, so I started to work 10 hours a week in a heroin clinic, in an addiction clinic, but it was 99% heroin. And I wanted to know what caused addiction, because in health you always want to know the causes, if possible, because if you know the causes and you treat the causes, it's much easier to treat the addiction. And if you don't know the causes, it's much harder to treat the addiction. And even if you manage to get the person off their drugs, they're very likely to relapse if the cause hasn't been found and fixed. If they've still got the cause, why won't they start to use drugs again? Well, most of them did. But I couldn't find any addiction clinic workers who knew what caused addiction. And I went to all the addiction clinics in Perth and Sydney and couldn't find anyone who could tell me the cause. But then in the addiction clinic I started to work 10 hours a week. One day I saw 15 heroin addicts and 5 of them had ADD. And when I went into their history carefully, it became apparent that what had happened was they had ADD as small children. That caused behaviour difficulties and distresses and problems. When they got to school, they tended to be problem children who got into trouble a lot and who had difficulty learning. So they often ended up leaving school early with a poor education and having to take labouring type work if they could get work, which wasn't paid very well. So I had a very nasty learning experience around that time. A 23-year-old young man came to see me because he was very distressed, and I diagnosed his ADD, ADHD. He was an IT worker, a pretty smart guy, but he had ADD, and it hadn't been diagnosed and it wasn't treated. So I told him that there was a problem, that I couldn't prescribe ADD medicines because I wasn't a pediatrician and I wasn't a psychiatrist, and also he was too old for pediatricians, but there was no point in sending him to see a psychiatrist because he'd been taking street drugs, and not even the psychiatrist would be allowed to prescribe ADD medicines. But I told him that there was a stimulant medicine which all doctors could prescribe, including me, which wasn't addictive. It was only about a half or a third or a quarter as strong as the stimulating dexamphetamine, Ritalin and Adderall ADD medicines, but it wasn't addictive. And so he wanted to try that, so I hadn't prescribed it before, but I gave him a prescription for 30 tablets, and it just worked wonders for him. He was wonderfully better. He was so happy. But he weighed 125 kilos. He was a big fellow, and he needed to take 3 of these modafinil tablets every morning to control his ADD, and 30 of those tablets cost him $143. So 30 tablets only lasted him 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, he ran out of the modafinil and he had no money to buy more, and he couldn't get the money to buy more. And so he got so upset and distressed and angry about that situation, about knowing what his mental illness was, but not being allowed to be prescribed the treatment that was addictive, and not being able to afford to buy the treatment that wasn't addictive, that he hung himself. And that was a big wake-up call to me, and I don't remember now exactly how, but somehow I found that I could have bought double-strength modafinil tablets from India for 50 cents each. So 1.5 of these double-strength tablets, which would have cost him 75 cents US, but about $1 a day Australian, would have fixed him, and he could have afforded $7 a week, even on unemployment benefits. So from then on, I imported modafinil tablets from India for ADD patients. That was legal in Australia. Any medicine that's legal in Australia, you can import, legally import 3 months supply for a patient. It has to be for a specific patient, so that was what I did. It was a great step forward. But once I realized that a third of heroin addicts had ADD, I went very carefully into the history of all of my addiction patients, and found that 19 out of 20 of them had major mental illnesses long before they started to take drugs. There was a general misconception that addiction caused mental health issues. Well, it certainly doesn't make your mental health better, it makes it worse, and some people get a new mental illness on top of the existing mental illnesses that they already have. But what started their addiction was seeking relief from the distress of mental illnesses which hadn't been diagnosed and treated correctly. There were about 8. The commonest was worry, anxiety disorders, panic attacks, social phobia, obsessive compulsive disorder, general phobias, that sort of thing. Then there was sleep disorders. A lot of people with addictions had been very bad sleepers and took drugs, alcohol or heroin or marijuana or sedating painkiller, addictive painkiller tablets to help them sleep. Then there was major depression. Then there was bipolar disorder, where people went from very high to very low. Then there was post-traumatic stress disorder. Then there was very low self-esteem. A lot of these people had come from broken homes and poor circumstances and had very low self-esteem, and that tended to cause them to turn to street drugs. Then there was what I call post-traumatic evil focus, people who had catastrophes that they couldn't cope with, so they focused on other people's problems far away, like the CIA or Guantanamo Bay, or the terrible things they were doing to women and children in some far-off place, and that was a way of avoiding their major trauma, but it was depressing, so that also caused them to seek relief from street drugs. And then there was another condition which I called IAD, which is irritability anxiety disorder. Anger is a common mental health problem, and it didn't seem to have a name, and it didn't seem to have a treatment. Australia is now going through an epidemic of domestic violence, which is due to anger. Some of the angry people were just bullies. They had discovered that when they got angry, everybody did whatever they wanted. So when they wanted people to do things, they just got angry. It was just bullying. But a lot of them didn't want to get angry. They didn't want to jeopardize their marriages, hurt their children, risk prosecution or imprisonment or homelessness, but they just got angry. And I found that they had all had childhood histories of very unhappy situations that made them angry, and if they got angry enough, often enough, it became a bad habit. It was a bit like epileptic fits. They just had a fit which was anger, not a convulsion. And I found also that the epilepsy medicines were often the best way to stop the anger. You could give them calming medicines, but all the calming medicines were addictive, and they would quickly become addicts of the calming medicines. But the epilepsy medicines are not addictive, and that calmed a lot of them down. So it became apparent that the way to beat addiction was to treat mental health. I set out to learn how to treat addiction, and I found that what I really needed to know was how to treat mental health. And why was a family doctor doing that? Well, because these people just mostly couldn't get mental health treatment. There was never going to be enough mental health workers to do all the work that was needed to help these people with their mental health issues. Most of them couldn't afford private psychiatrists and psychologists, and if they had insurance, they could get a certain number of sessions a year, but not enough. And if they didn't have health insurance, then they had to rely on the free government clinics, and the free government clinics had very long waiting lists. So what I realized was that the main problem was that there were never going to be enough mental health workers to help all the people who needed mental health help, and that addiction, which was really fourth stage mental health disorder was going to get worse and worse because there were so many people who couldn't get proper treatment, proper diagnosis and treatment for the mental health disorders, and ended up becoming sitting ducks for street drug dealers, and everything that the street drug dealers sell is addictive. And why was that? I found that it was because there were only two tools used in mental health, and they both had great weaknesses. One tool was medicine, and the other tool was talk therapy or psychotherapy or counselling. Medicine had this terrible problem that so many medicines were addictive. The people who needed to take medicine, because the right medicine in the right amounts at the right times, if they were non-addictive, could help people a great deal, but so many of them were addictive. Because the people who make medicine want to sell as much as they can for as long as they can for as high a price as they can. So they made many medicines addictive. All the anxiety, worry, sleep disorder medicines were addictive. The three main medicines for ADD, and a lot of painkillers were addictive. And the other thing they did was they made the medicines not very effective. The medicines nearly all came as capsules or tablets. And when you swallow a capsule or a tablet of medicine, to be absorbed, it has to go right down your gut and be absorbed in the stomach or intestines, and it takes half an hour to an hour to start to be absorbed and to start to work, and 1 to 2 hours to work strongly. And that's too slow for a lot of mental health disorders and for addiction cravings. So people would have to take the tablets or capsules 2 or 3 or 4 times a day routinely, whether they needed them or not, in case they needed them, because they wouldn't work fast enough if they waited till they needed them to take them. The other treatment, the other tool in mental health disorders was talk therapy, psychotherapy, counselling, and that had two great weaknesses. One is it's very slow. With a first consultation, you need an hour to go thoroughly into a person's history of their mental health disorders and what probably caused it and what makes it worse and what makes it better, and why they've crashed, because we usually didn't see them till they crashed, and how to treat them. And you need to see them, to talk to them for at least half an hour, maybe 3/4 of an hour every week. So that took a lot of time. It was very slow. And talk therapy was very expensive, because to be a therapist, you had to have at least a 4-year psychology degree, and a lot of psychologists had 7-year PhDs, and all the psychiatrists had to have a 6-year general medical degrees, and then some general medical practice, and then 3, 4, or 5 years of postgraduate psychiatric training. So these people, therapists, they were very intelligent, well-educated people who'd undergone long courses, and they needed to be paid well. If they didn't get paid well, there would be even less of them. So that was the problem. Today, we use tools for everything. Where would I be without my laptop and my iPhone and so many other things I've got, my electric blood pressure machine. We use many tools for everything. If there isn't a good tool for something, someone will make a good tool for it. But in mental health, still the same old things that have been for 50 or 100 years, talk therapy and medicine. So what I realized was needed was three things. The first was a whole package of tools to do everything quickly and effectively. Secondly, self-help. People had to help themselves. Most of them were never going to, almost all of them were never going to get enough help from healthcare professionals, mental health care professionals, to get better. And if we made tools that they could use themselves to do half the work, some people could do most of the work, some people could do 3/4 of the work or half the work or 1/4 of the work. Some people couldn't really do anything for themselves. But if altogether half the work was being done as self-help, the other half of the work would be covered by the number of mental health care workers that there are. So the tools had to be tools that people could use to do self-help. And the third thing that we had to do was they had to start to treat their problems as early as possible. There are no perfect mothers, no perfect fathers, no perfect families, no perfect homes or neighborhoods or countries or schools. So children, every child has some suffering which causes some problems for them. And those problems should be found and fixed as early as possible. But what usually happened was we sort of thought, oh, only a few people have mental health problems, not everyone. So, and we looked down on those people and we blame them, even though it was nearly always started by things in their childhood which were beyond their control, or by very nasty accidents or catastrophes in later life as adults, like car accidents, business failures, bankruptcy, divorces, and so on. So what happened is that because there's so much waiting list, and because people with mental health disorders were looked down on and blamed and treated as second-rate citizens, they didn't like to ask for help, and they didn't ask for help until they got desperate, and then they'd often crashed. And if they got help 5, 10, 20 years late, when they'd crashed, they needed a lot of work, so much work that they were never going to get enough. So our tools and self-help needed to help people to help themselves as soon as possible with their problems, not after they'd crashed. And fortunately, the stigma has somewhat passed on mental health things, and people now are willing to talk about their mental health issues and to seek help. But there's still not enough people to help them. So I developed a package over 27 years of 7 tools, not necessarily in this order, but videos was one thing. every person that you deal with talk therapy, you have to not only diagnose it, you have to explain everything to them, because it's so hard for them to get better unless they understand everything. And I spent so much time explaining things to people, helping them to understand, that I realized that I needed to make videos. And there's no faster, better way to understand your problems than to watch the right videos on those problems. So we made videos, started about 12 years ago. And then we had websites. Well, actually we had a website before we had videos. And I had a website called healthvideos.com, which became mentalhealthvideos.com. But it was long and detailed, which is how I tended to do things. And people were wanting things quicker and quicker and quicker. We were into the TikTok age. And so eventually I had to make a second website, which is just called smilefixit.com, where in 2 pages you can see everything and just tap on the parts that look to be interesting to you and go straight to them, and they're fairly short and to the point as well. And then there was an app. I started to save time by using a checklist with 20 questions, which I developed, which one of my assistants would do with the patients before I saw them, and that would save me a lot of time. But checklists are a lot better than nothing, but they're still a bit slow. So eventually we had to make an app, and making an app is a lot of work and it's very expensive. But we ended up about a year ago finishing the Mental Fix-It app. And the Mental Fix-It app you can download on your phone. It's free. Just find on your phone the App Store icon or the Google Play icon if it's an Android phone, and just tap on it, and in a few seconds you can download the free Mental Fix-It app. And the Mental Fix-It app asks questions about every aspect of your mental health and some about your social health and physical health that was related. And each question had 3 possible answers, and you just had to pick your answer and tap it. So you could tap your way through all those questions in about 10 minutes. But people thought that was too long. So we had to shorten it to just ask the most important questions, which they could tap through in 5 minutes. And my brilliant tech assistant, who helped me make the app, and who's in New York at the moment doing some study, will be back in a month or 2, and we are going to redo the app so that people can do it in 2 minutes. And we're going to ask the questions differently, because one of the things I learned was that it was far better to ask people what they wanted and needed than to tell them what their disease was, what their mental disorder was. Some people are very relieved to know that they've got that this mysterious unhappiness and dysfunction they've got is a condition which is well known, and a lot of people have, and it's got a name, and they find that helpful. But a lot of people find it very discouraging to know that they've got a mental disease, a mental disorder. And if I asked them, what do you want and need, rather than telling them they've got this disorder, that made them more positive, and they started to look for what they needed, and that often helped them to get what they needed. So instead of saying, you've got panic disorder, we would say, do you want to be calmer and more relaxed? And then they start to think about that. Yes, I want to be calmer and more relaxed, and that would help them to adjust their life. Not, you've got that terrible ADD, ADHD disorder, but do you want to learn to focus and concentrate better, and to be a better decision maker, and not to be hyperactive? Yes, that's what I want. And they were then more likely to get that than once they realized that that's what they wanted, that's what they needed. So that's how the Mental Fix It app is going to be soon. The fourth tool was live streaming, which of course is what we're doing now, because live streaming has become very popular, and a lot of people like to watch live streaming about matters that are a particular concern to them. And what happened was that my original 10-minute videos, people just stopped watching them, because they were all, well, not all, but 90% of them were watching under a minute TikTok videos. And YouTube had to come up with YouTube Shorts. So I had to make a lot of short videos, under a minute videos. And of course, with an under a minute video, you can only cover one subject, one item. And there are a lot of items in mental health and addiction, so I needed a lot of videos, and I made 50, and that wasn't enough, and then 70, and now I think I've got about 100, and I've got a half a dozen that I now know that I need to do, which when I get time I need to make an under a minute video on. But which videos should a particular person watch? Because different people have different problems and different needs, and they need to watch different videos. And of course the Mental Fix It app tells people which videos will help them most. When you do the Mental Fix It app, as you tap your choice of answers to the last question, you get an immediate instant report on the screen, which tells you the four things that will help you most. First of all, not necessarily in this order, but it tells you which 6 1-minute videos to watch immediately. So you can take, in 10 seconds you can download the app, and in 5 minutes now you can do the app check, and then in 6 minutes you can watch the 6 most helpful videos. So 15 minutes after you started, you're miles in front. You know what your problems are, what your needs, wants are, and you understand them because the videos explain them, and the videos also explain the treatments and tell you the medicines that will help you most. Of course, you have to get a prescription for the medicines, and not everybody needs medicines, but a lot of people need medicines. Most people need both the talk therapy that includes the app and the videos, and also medicines. And it's good for people to find out what medicines are likely to help them most, because then they can consult Dr. Google and do some research on it before they go to see their doctor and discuss with their doctor which medicines they need. And the third part of the report is a complete list of everything that you've tapped as a problem. And each thing you tap as a problem has a score. The score depends on how important that thing is and how bad your particular case is. For instance, major depression and bipolar disorder are much more harmful and dangerous than mild anxiety or mild insomnia. So severe bipolar disorder or major depression gets a score of 15, and mild anxiety or mild insomnia gets a score of 4. So everything you've tapped is a problem, a mild, a moderate or a severe problem, and depending on its importance gets a score. And your report includes all of those items that you've tapped are a problem in descending order of score. Because to get completely better, you've got to know all your problems. You're unlikely to get better from a problem that you don't know you've got. And sadly, that's one of the problems about the slowness of talk therapy, because talk therapy, you usually never get past the first or second big problem, which might be 50% of your problem, 60% of your problem, but the smaller problems together are only 30 or 40 or 50%, but they still spoil your life, put you in danger. So that list is very helpful, and you can then decide which problem you're going to tackle first. You can't do everything at once, and sometimes the biggest problem is so big that you just can't cope with it. And in that case, we'd recommend that you find one of the smaller problems that you feel able to fix, and face that one and do whatever is necessary to get it fixed. And when it's fixed, you'll feel a bit stronger, you'll feel a bit happier, a bit less distressed, and you'll be a bit better problem solver. So if you knock off 1, 2, 3, 4 smaller problems, you get stronger and happier and a better problem solver, and you can then take on the big ones. Some people, of course, are able to take on the biggest problem first, and if you can, that's what you should do. You should fix the biggest problems first, but you should start with whatever you can deal with. And the fourth thing that the report comes up on the instant report is a graph of your total scores, because every time you do the app check, it adds all the scores for all your problems together and give you a total score, and then it puts that in a graph. So each time you do the check, which should be several times a week to begin with, you get a total score which is added to the graph, and that is of great importance because you can just in one glance see that your scores are getting better, so the treatment is right, or the scores are not getting better, so the treatment is not right. You've got to do something different. So instant feedback as to whether you're getting better or staying the same or getting worse is very important. It helps you to know whether you're on the right treatment, and it also helps you to know whether what you did yesterday or last night was helpful or harmful. If you yesterday played golf and had a couple of beers with your friends and felt really relaxed, and the next day your score's better, you know that's a good thing to do. But if you had an argument with your wife and you went down the pub and got drunk, the next day your score's worse, you know that's something you shouldn't do. So the feedback of the app graph of total scores is very valuable in helping you to know what to do and what not to do. And something I've learned lately of great importance is the fact that mental health disorders are usually family disorders. we tend to think that everybody's in an individual much more than they actually are. For 98% of human history, humans lived together very close. There were no brick walls. Everybody was very close, and they had to stay close because if they didn't, the wild animals would get them. So they lived in groups of not less than 30 people, because 30 was enough to protect one another from the wild animals. But the groups were not bigger than 150 because there had to be enough food within walking distance. There were no farms, no factories. They just went out and picked fruit and vegetable matter within walking distance, because they had to be home by the time it got dark, because there were no electric lights, no torches. So if they got more than 150 people, there wasn't enough food within walking distance. So people, human beings are genetically and chemically conditioned to live close to other people. And what happens to one affects others. In my family, for instance, there were some illustrations of this. One of my great-grandmothers, living in the back blocks of South Australia, had 9 children by 3 different husbands, and then she died at 42 of cancer. Dying at 42 of cancer means that your immune system is low, and your immune system is low when you had a lot of stress, and she obviously had a lot of stress. And that affected her 5th child. Her first 4 were boys, and the 5th one was a girl, and that was my grandmother. And she was a very disturbed lady. That affected my mother. My mother was an extremely hard-working and intelligent person who grew up in a poor country family and became the head girl in the ducks of the best school in Western Australia, the Perth Modern School, in 1925, and a champion hockey and tennis player. And she only did that by working very hard and being very smart. And then sadly, unfortunately, she had 3 babies in 3 years and 3 weeks on a remote farm with no shops. The shops and the doctors and the pharmacies were 20 miles away, and the grandmothers were 20 miles away, and it was wartime, petrol rationing, old cars, old roads, so she got no help. And I imagine she had terrible sleep deprivation and a lot of worry when we got sick. You know, couldn't just walk down the road and see the local doctor. So, and very, very tragically then, I think when I was about 2, her baby brother died of appendicitis, and that was a great tragedy in the family, and her mother never recovered from the loss of this son, who died way away in the bush from appendicitis because he didn't get his appendix operated on for 2 days. And there was another death in the family of a 64-year-old from cancer. His wife was paraplegic. So there's no doubt whatever that mental disturbances run in families, and one of the most important things that we all should do, which I didn't realise I should do it till long time after I should have done it, is to check out the whole family, going back your parents, your grandparents, and the most prominent great-grandparents, and what happened to them. Were there any early deaths? Were there divorces? Were there adoptions? Were there economic disasters? Were there climate disasters? Was there a war? Did they have a car crash? Because those things affect the people and their children and their grandchildren, and sometimes even their great-grandchildren. It's now generally known that any major problem that occurs in a person is going to affect them and at least the next 2 generations. And people often don't know why they get depressed, or don't know why they get anxious, or don't know why they have difficulty relating to their husband or their wife, and it's because of a tragedy that's occurred in the family. So I don't mean you should morbidly dwell on it, but you should know of any major things that happened in your family, at least your parents and your grandparents and maybe some of your great-grandparents. And it's amazing what you can find online now. For instance, my parents both lived to 97, and my father's sister lived to 95, and one brother lived to 91, and one died at 68 of cancer, lung cancer, who was a very heavy smoker and a heavy drinker. And why was he like that? I don't know. There's one story that when he was a baby he got pneumonia, and his mother took him to the doctor, and the doctor said there was nothing they could do. So she took him home and wrapped him up in, and he got better. But it could have been that he had an uncle, my grandmother's brother, with the same Christian name, who went to the First World War and suffered terribly, got trench feet and became an alcoholic and never married, and eventually wandered away into the bush somewhere and was never found and died. And some people would say that there's good evidence that my uncle, who died from lung cancer, from heavy drinking and heavy smoking at 68, where his siblings lived into the 90s, became like that because of his uncle who died tragically. People, there are lots of reasons for it, and if you're interested, I'd recommend a book called It Didn't Start With You. It didn't start with you. A lot of problems started with someone else in the previous generation, or in your generation, an older or younger brother or sister. But maybe a parent or an uncle or an auntie or a cousin or a grandparent or a great uncle or a great auntie, and people sometimes do what make the same mistakes that previous family members made for reasons we don't really understand. But it's very important for you to know every major disaster that happened in your family for at least 2 or 3 generations. And quite often you have never heard about them because people don't talk about bad things. One of my father's cousins married a man who spent 2 years in prison for sexually molesting a teenage girl, and we didn't know about that for a long time, and things like that can happen, and they are hush-hush. You don't hear about them, but they have had quite big effects on other people in the family. So that's called transgenerational trauma. So what's the summary of all this? The summary is that after 53 years as a doctor and a lot of work and study since I've retired, because I'm retired now, I've learned that the 5 most important things to have a good life are, first of all, mental health. If you've got mental health, that goes a long way. If you've got bad mental health, that goes a long way. The second thing is good relationships. Human beings for hundreds of thousands of years had close relationships, always lived close, no brick walls, protecting one another against wild animals, cooperating in collecting food out of nature, out of the jungle or the forest or whatever. Thirdly, a strong immune system, which means you have to have strong endorphins. Endorphins are over 20 chemicals that we produce in our brain and glands that manage pain and distress and our immune system. And our immune system fights infections, allergies, inflammation, autoimmune diseases and cancers. And if, as with my great-grandmother, you die at 42 from cancer, that means that your immune system wasn't strong. So mental health, enough good relationships, strong immune system. Fourthly, the habit of smiling. Smiling is the fastest way, the quickest thing you can do to get better. Why is that? Well, we've got about 25 chemicals in our brain that make us happy. There's the over 20 endorphins. Endorphins are endogenous morphines, and there's over 20 of them. And as well as managing the immune system, they relieve pain and distress and make us feel happy. And then there's also dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and noradrenaline. So that's 25 chemicals. And of course we've known for quite a long time that when those chemicals are high, we feel good. We smile and we laugh and we're happy. But what we didn't know till more recently is that when you smile, that actually causes your brain and your glands to produce extra happy chemicals. So it's very important to smile and to laugh. And when you smile and laugh, usually the people you're with smile and laugh. and everybody, the whole thing gets better. It's very good for your family for you to smile and to laugh. So, mental health, good relationships, enough good relationships, a strong immune system with endorphins, smiling as often as you can. Every time you look in the mirror, you should smile. And the final thing is no addictions. You don't want addictions. And if you have had those 4 things, you won't have addictions, because addictions are stage 4 of mental illness. Stage 4 of poor mental health, bad relationships, not enough endorphins, getting infections, allergies, inflammation, autoimmune diseases and cancers because your immune system is low. So, I'm very old. I don't know how to talk to people in this live streaming thing. That is, to have conversation with them, and but I am very interested in knowing what you think. So please, whatever platform you watch, because my smart techie guy got it organised so that when I talk on TikTok, which is all that I used to talk on, I'm now also on YouTube and on Instagram and on Facebook and on X. Not quite sure about X, but I think so. So whatever platform you watch is on, please send me your messages, your questions, your comments, your criticisms, how we could do better. Or send it to us on our email address, which is healthestuff@gmail.com. healthestuff@gmail.com. You can find that at smilefixit.com, smilefixit.com, which is our short website where you can see everything you want to know and tap whatever you want. Also tells you what our email address is. So I look forward to hearing from you. And every evening after I do the live streaming, I go through all the new followers, all the comments, and all the likes, and respond wherever I can. Some I can't respond to because apparently if you're not a follower, we can't communicate with you. But and then a lot comes in overnight, and tomorrow morning I'll do the same again. And I've been doing live streaming at 7 p.m. Perth time, which is 9 p.m. Sydney and Melbourne time, but sometimes as many as 20% of our viewers are Americans, and sometimes 10% of our viewers are from the UK, and certainly sometimes there are just a few sprinkling viewers from Sweden and Denmark and Norway and Africa and wherever. And 7 p.m. Perth time is 7 a.m. New York time and 4 a.m. California time, and London is somewhere around that. So that's a very user unfriendly timing. So in future I'll be doing two of the 4 sessions in the morning Perth time, which will be in the evening, and much more better time for people in the Northern Hemisphere. Okay, I think that's enough. So I'll shut down now, and today is Wednesday. I'll be back again at 7 o'clock Perth time on Friday. And um, either morning or evening in Saturday and Sunday.